In 1908, Sunshine Biscuits released Hydrox, a cream-filled cookie sandwich that was overshadowed 4 years later by the release of its imitator Oreos, whose popularity quickly grew past Hydrox's to the point where people view Oreos as the original. Honestly, if you see a cookie like this, guaranteed you think of Oreos, or you are a liar. It's amazing how the copy can take over from the original in the public eye. This works as a perfect, not at all forced metaphor for the topic at hand. Many people think that The Mandalorian was created with an original lead because they wanted to save Boba Fett for something else later on. True or not, the iconography of the Mandalorian armor and culture that has been built up over the years only exists because of the original character. The irony being that not only does the Book of Boba Fett live in the shadow of the Mandalorian, but it relies on it for its best moments. All that said, I do think that there is something worthwhile in the bones of this series, and I want to see what we can build it out into and find a way to make it a bit more compelling. Let's do this. Alright, Internet, before I get into this, I do want to lay down a bit of a, disclaimer that I don't think I know better than Dave Filoni, Jon Favreau, their writing team, any of that. I'm not a professional writer. I'm not going to pretend like I am. I am just an outsider who is using this format to critique media. And I get to do that comfortably with the power of hindsight, you know? I just want to throw that out there. I'm not trying to act like they made bad thing and I could make good thing. This is all a thought experiment, you know? So the biggest problem that I, and I'm sure many other people have with the series, is that it ties far too tightly into The Mandalorian. I understand that they are part of the same interconnected universe, one that exists within the larger Star Wars universe in and of itself, but I think their execution weakens both shows. Relying on a prior show to set up your concept is one thing. I know what a spin-off is, obviously. It's the fact that it takes the story from The Mandalorian with all its characters and completely overshadows the Boba Fett story with them by including them in its arc. We completely ignore what is going on with our main character to focus on characters who aren't in this show. I mean, they are, but they aren't. And not only does this rob the Book of Boba Fett from being its own show with its own identity, it robs The Mandalorian of payoff from its second season, with the Grogu Mando reuniting being on another show that sucks, and it's just trying to force viewers who may not have been into what was going on Book of Boba Fett to have to watch it, and that sucks. It's bad, we all know it, it's getting cut. Now, just like in the show, we have spent too much time on The Mandalorian and we need to refocus. We need to talk about our main character's arc because the way they implement it using non-linear story structure is something that could be really interesting. But before we talk about the timelines and the story itself, we should talk about Boba Fett as a character. Part of what made Boba Fett such an enduring character in the fandom is the fact that the little bits we knew about him really created an evocative, unique, and compelling character to look at and to think about. Because in the original trilogy, the scenes he's in, he mostly just stands in the background to look intimidating, then eats shit in one of his only real scenes. But he's got an iconic look. And there's that line about no disintegrations that everyone quotes.
No disintegrations.
And it really evokes something in fans. He became this badass, no-nonsense figure who would take out his bounty without flinching. With that and the expansion on his persona from legends as a figure with his own dubious moral code, you have the starting point of a great character, and we see how he could grow into someone who we'd want to have as a leader. And that's what we need to fine-tune here. Okay, so I want to talk about the flashbacks because I really like the idea of them, but I don't think that they were executed properly. I want to change how they work here. I want them to be tied into developing his character motivations in a more direct one-to-one presentation of them. They should be used as moments to clarify what the main timeline's decision-making process is. And there's a few ways we can go about doing that. Boba Fett has to make a tough decision. What will he do? Here's a scene that ties in thematically, letting us understand why he's about to do what he's about to do. And another way could be Boba Fett does something that is out of character for us as the audience, followed by a scene that lets us understand why that happened. It's easy. Now, obviously, the flashbacks would not only exist in those moments. You would have to have scenes cut up in between them to make sure that there's an actual narrative within them and not just, here's the thing happening, here's the thing happening. But you get the idea. The scenes will all be building to these moments and will allow us to have A and B storylining within a single character's scenes. It's easy. It's something that I think would allow us to use these multiple timelines to really pay each other off in a more interesting way. And presenting the non-linear storytelling like this also decouples it from the back-to-tank scenes, and I think that is something that I would prefer, because the way they presented it, honestly, it was just clunky storytelling. I do, however, want to keep that element in the series in some way. Showcasing the toll his lifestyle and becoming the daimyo has taken on his body allows us to deconstruct not only Boba Fett, but the archetype of the action hero badass. Similar to how John McClane is constantly put through the ringer in the original Die Hard, but we expand that not only for the momentary getting your ass kicked stuff, but to see the long-term effects that it plays on his body, and you've got something that I think is very compelling. We don't get enough of this in action storytelling, and I think that we'd be better off with it. To continue with a Die Hard reference, the more recent films in that series tend to not break down their lead as much, and even when they do, it's not in a very believable way, and it makes them lesser films for that. And I think that's why so many Steven Seagal movies blow, because they're more interested in making him look like a cool action guy than telling a compelling story. Just look at Rocky. He is less interesting the more he's winning, and because of that, they're constantly trying to knock him down, make him the underdog in the situation even as he has become more and more successful, because building yourself up when you're knocked down is, I'll say it again, compelling. Man, my references are really geared in a certain direction genre-wise this video. Okay, lastly, I want to move away from the story's structure and into the story itself. The second episode sets up an oncoming war between the Fetts and the Hutts, and episode 3 introduces these 3 districts and their leaders that should be united to help Boba Fett win this war. A more focused version of this, to me, could have been a more interesting season of television than what we got, because the show really was pitched to us as a crime show in Star Wars, and we didn't get that. We got a bit of that and a whole bunch of greater world building. That's no good. We've covered that already. Alright, so I'm not going to go through and outline the series episode by episode, story by story, because we'd be here all day, and I think the signal to noise ratio on that wouldn't be interesting for the viewers to watch. But I will say what I think that this story needs is to do what Star Wars is built on, creating pastiches of old samurai movies and westerns and recycling them into something new. Because it's like George Lucas said.
It's like poetry, so if they rhyme, hopefully it'll work.
That said, some ideas that I think would be cool. One could be doing a Throne of Blood / Macbeth homage, where Fett and Fennec have to kill a sovereign for an ambitious usurper, and then madness ensues. Space Madness. We could go for a Man with No Name homage, where they have to go to another city to pull off a heist that's in the same vein as A Few Dollars More. Space Heist. There's plenty of ways for us to tell fun, exciting, action-packed adventures that are standalone for their episode, but because it is Boba Fett trying to win over the favor of these other leaders, it allows us to build them into the wider narrative of the season. You can do it in a tight 6 episodes, or even expand it to 8, depending on what you want to do. I don't think we need to keep the Pike Syndicate involved, but they could definitely be there, especially if you want a more direct tie between the flashback sequences and the modern day timeline, which is what they were originally going for with that. Hell, they could even be more interesting than going to war against the Hutts. We could cut them out entirely, seeing as they kind of go nowhere. And okay, I know that the story thing I was going over was supposed to be my lastly, but I have another lastly. Lastly, we need to cover a modern Star Wars staple, fan service. I hate the way modern mainstream media is going further and further in this direction, honestly. Now, before you say it, I will. This entire show is entirely fan service to begin with, and I agree. It takes a legacy character and follows them in a legacy setting, yet here I am feeling the need to shoehorn more characters into the story to fit the brand. Just a snake eating its own tail, I swear. Now, because we cut the part where the show becomes Mandalorian Season 2.5, we're not going to be using those characters. Much to Dave Filoni's dismay, that means no Ahsoka. Don't worry though, because we're going to use some of his other OCs, Cobb Vanth and Cad Bane. If we are keeping the Pike Syndicate in this, something I have definitely warmed up to while writing this storyline that they have in the season just fits perfectly as is. You don't really need to change much, it works. You know what? Let's even keep the Hutts. Have them be like a red herring. We move their stuff earlier so it all takes place in the first episode and a half. And that could be fun. You know, we think we're getting these heirs to the throne from the original series and we get something new. That works. They were right there. I'll admit it. I was the one being a little bit of a yeah about it. And I think that about does it. We now have a more focused, compelling, rise to power crime epic featuring non-linear elements that flesh out the lead's motives and not just filling out plot holes in the timeline. What it honestly always should have been. And I think that's a good place to wrap it up. Thank you so much for watching, especially if you're still here at the end. Leave me a comment on what you would change for the series or what you would change to my changes. I just realized I left my poster there. That looks terrible. And while you're there leaving a comment, you can you can subscribe, because I know you're not. And until next time, watch my other videos, or you can just have a good one.